Chapter 6. Jo Grant woke up with the feeling that something was wrong. She lay in the darkness for a moment, listening, hearing nothing but her own breathing and the faint pulse of blood in her ears. "You'll have to help me, Jo," the doctor had said. Yes, that was it. The doctor had been talking in her dreams again. The same old familiar fatherly voice. The same old familiar fatherly demands. "You'll have to help me." And the TARDIS in the background and some sort of mist. Go away, Doctor. It was all a long time ago. Another Jo. Another universe. Beep. Jo jumped, sat up in the bed. For a moment, nothing. Then the sound was repeated. A faint, unmistakably electronic beeping. She sighed. Matthew was still awake in his room, playing computer games. Again. She opened her eyes, glanced at the brass alarm clock on the bedside table by the lamp. It was 1:10 in the morning. He shouldn't, thought Jo. He really shouldn't. He's got school tomorrow. She reached out for the bedside lamp, leaning across the cold sheets that she'd probably always think of as Cliff's side of the bed. She fumbled for the switch, awkwardly positioned underneath the old-fashioned cloth shade. It clunked across, and a warm brown light filled the room, illuminating the familiar stained oak panelling of the wardrobe opposite the end of the bed, the white wicker laundry basket, the Treasure Island clothes chest with its brass decorations, and huge fake lock. "Your room looks like a throwback to the 70s, Mum," Matthew had said to her the other week. A new sophisticated phrase from his new sophisticated school, she supposed. But he was right. Purple carpet, sea blue walls, grapefruit yellow ceiling. She really ought to redecorate it. She'd done the rest of the house not long after Cliff had left, but she hadn't been able to bear the thought of changing this room too much. There was even a pair of white moon boots, thick with dust, stuffed into the narrow gap between the wardrobe and the wall. She hadn't worn them for perhaps 20 years? Jo lay back, propping herself up against the headboard. She closed her eyes, felt herself drifting back to sleep. "You'll have to help me. Beep. Beep, 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 beep." Reluctantly, Jo opened her eyes again. Then, even more reluctantly, she got out of the bed. She padded across the room, pulled an old pink dressing gown off its hook on the door, stuffed her feet into some slippers. In the corridor, she could see a faint, changing glow of coloured light under Matthew's door. She heard a click, a loud whisper, then silence. She tapped gently on the door. No reply. "Matthew, I know you're playing with that machine again. I want you to go to bed. Now." "Sorry, Mum." He didn't sound sorry, and Jo could still see the coloured light. She opened the door, saw her son in his dressing gown, sitting cross-legged in front of the computer. On the screen, huge grey, saucer-shaped spaceships floated over a stylized burning city. The words, "Game on hold," flickered in red in the middle of the screen. "Off," she said firmly. "Now." "But I've nearly reached the highest kill rate ever." Matthew looked up at her, bright-eyed. His hair was golden blonde, just the colour hers had been at that age. "Please, just 5 minutes." Jo looked at the screen again. She was reluctant to turn the machine off herself. An 11-year-old was entitled to a certain amount of dignity, and she also knew how addictive computer games were. If she turned it off and Matthew lost his chance at the highest kill rate, it was quite possible he'd start all over again as soon as she was gone. "It's 1:10, she said gently. "Please, Matthew, you're going to be so tired in the morning. Save the game and finish it tomorrow." Matthew hesitated, then reached out and fiddled with a mouse on its mat on the floor. The screen blanked, and the words, "Game saved," appeared in green. Slowly, reluctantly, his hand reached out and turned the machine off. Joe reached down and ruffled Matthew's hair. If you had real space invaders to deal with, you'd have a lot more than a kill rate to worry about, she said. Matthew looked up, grinned at her. So you keep telling me, Mum? A pause. How many invaders did you stop? Really? Joe smiled. Don't start that again. Half of it's classified. And the other half I wouldn't believe. I know. Matthew stood up. You know, sometimes I wish I had a normal mum. He was still smiling, but Joe could sense the serious undertone in his words. A normal mum wouldn't wake up in the middle of the night with her heart beating double time because she'd been dreaming of a time-travelling alien who needed her help. A normal mum wouldn't think that the best part of her life, the only important part of her life, had happened more than 20 years ago, and that everything that had happened since was a sort of afterthought. First, she'd saved the universe with the Doctor. Then she'd saved the world with Cliff. Now she was raising her son on her own in a 2-bedroom house in Hackney, with 2 jobs and a bedroom that needed decorating and a roof that needed retiling, and hadn't life supposed to get better? Joe became aware that Matthew was still looking at her, a solemn expression on his small round face. Sometimes I wish you had a normal mum too, she said. Then she bent down and kissed him. You be up on time in the morning, okay? Matthew nodded. Joe retreated to the landing, waited until she heard the sound of Matthew getting into the bed, until she saw the remaining light under his door go dark. She thought about going back to bed, but she was thoroughly awake now, and really felt like a cup of tea. She shuffled downstairs, her fluffy slippers flopping on the beige carpet. In the kitchen, the neon strip light flickered into life, dazzling her. When it had settled down, Joe saw that the blinds were still up over the double windows, revealing black squares of night. Irritably, she pulled them down, trying to remember whether she'd told Matthew to do it and he'd forgotten, or whether she had just forgotten about it altogether. She put the kettle on and found a brown box of tea bags. She smiled to herself, remembering the Doctor and his Assam and Darjeeling, then Cliff, rosehip, chamomile, nettle, mate. Now, on her own, she bought Sainsbury's own in tea bags, like everyone else. The latest bags were triangular for some reason. She put one in a chipped and none too clean blue mug labelled Save the Whale, and wondered if the entire course of her life was reflected by the tea she drank. The Doctor would have been amused by that theory, she decided. He would have given her one of his I know better grins and told her it was interesting. Cliff would have smiled vaguely and started talking about something more important. But it was true nonetheless. Both of them had told Joe what tea she had to drink. Now she had a free choice, and she bought the cheapest, the first off the shelf. Story of my life, she muttered. But she was smiling again. This was freedom, she supposed, to sit in your own kitchen, making a cup of your own cheap, nasty tea. The kettle boiled, and she poured water onto the alien-looking triangular bag. She prodded the sack-like body a few times with a teaspoon, then fished it out, added a drop of milk, and took a cautious sip. Too hot. She slopped a little of the tea out into the sink to make it easier to carry, then left the kitchen holding the mug in one hand. She had got as far as the corridor when the phone rang. Joe jumped. Automatically, she started towards the lounge where the phone was, but was halted when the ringing stopped and her ancient answering machine spluttered into life. Hi, I'm not able to answer the phone. Quite, thought Joe. It's 1 o'clock in the morning, thank you very much. She started towards the stairs. The answering machine speaker crackled. Is that Joe Jones? The voice was American, female, whispering. Afraid. Joe froze. The line fuzzed for a moment, then, My name is Julie Sands. and I'm calling from a sat phone in Kilgai, Tanzania, and I'm calling because we really need your help. I sent you an email. I don't know whether you've got that, but it's got worse. This Captain Hines has got... Jesus, you're not going to believe me. He's got an alien with him. What? Look, Rowena's inside. I can't get to her, and there aren't any police for miles. Oh, God! A pause. Slowly, tea in hand, Joe started towards the phone. Jesus Christ, he's dragging her out. I think he's shot her. Joe almost dropped her tea on the carpet. She jumped for the phone, scrabbled the handset off its rest. What's happening there? Clattering sounds, something which sounded like it might be a gunshot. The line fuzzed. A mechanical voice, faint, artificial, alien. Get this one too. Joe, are you there? We need your help. A roar of static. Then silence. After a while there was a click and a dialing tone. Joe stared at the handset for a while, her heart thumping. Then she pulled the telephone notepad. The stupid one, bordered with kittens playing in roses, that Cliff had bought her on their first wedding anniversary after he'd left her, and scribbled Kilgai, Tanzania. 2 women, 1 shot? Alien, artificial voice. Not Dalek. Unit connection? 1. Contact unit. 2. Get Matthew out of this. 3. She hesitated. She remembered the doctor's voice in her dream. You'll have to help me, Joe. Okay, Doctor. You win. She underlined the words out of this on the notepad, then lifted the phone and dialed a number she had never thought she'd need again, but had somehow never forgotten. Rather to her own surprise, she was smiling. Regimental Sergeant Major John Benton looked at the screen and frowned. There's certainly something going on out there, Joe, he said. We've got a team in Kilgai now. Doing what? Benton sighed. You know I can't tell you that. He nearly added, you shouldn't even be here, but thought better of it. He and Joe had been through too much to allow a remark like that, even after all these years. He glanced at the decanters of whiskey and gin on the polished wood sideboard, and wondered if he should offer her a drink. Just give me some idea, she was saying. Does it involve any of the known alien races? Benton shook his head. Come on, Joe. I don't make the rules. As Benton had half expected, Joe simply got up, walked round the desk, and looked at the screen for herself. You haven't changed, Joe, he commented. Always ready to cross the front line. Kilgai, Tanzania. Incident Class N, she read. What's Class N? They divide incidents up into Y for, yes, it does immediately threaten the existence of the human race, and N for, no, it doesn't. Joe laughed. You haven't changed either, or you wouldn't be able to say that with a straight face. Come on, what does it really mean? Benton felt himself blushing. For a moment he thought he'd managed to fool her. Suddenly he was 20 years old again, outclassed and outwitted by all the smart university people, the captains, the scientists, the brigadiers. I don't know what it means, he snapped. They're always changing the categories. It's not my job to keep up with them. He waved around the huge office with its regimental and UN flags, its silver swords and polished wood. All this is just a show, you know. I file reports, keep an eye on the paperclips, and tell the wives and kiddies when one of the lads cops it. Joe was silent for a moment. Do you really have to do that? She asked. Twice in the last week. The captain couldn't do it himself. He's still out there. Out where? You know I can't. It's Kilgai, isn't it? And who's the captain? Jacob Hines? Benton looked helplessly at the desk. You seem to know all about it already, he said at last. The email they were talking about mentioned Jacob Hines by name. Julie said he warned them away from the area. Look, that woman was afraid when she rang me. And she was afraid of Jacob Hines, a unit officer. You should at least look into it. Benton picked up a paperclip that was lying on the desk and began bending it back and forth with his fingers. Joe, do you know how many hysterical reports of aliens we get at the front desk? 200 a day. I'm sure your friend met Captain Hines at the gorge. I'm sure they found something strange. That's probably why the team are there. But I don't believe that a unit captain... Do you know Hines personally? Benton sighed. Joe was relentless, he thought. It was worse than dealing with the press. Not personally, but all unit officers are thoroughly vetted. You know that. Joe thought for a moment. Then it's probably mind control. It has to be mind control. The paperclip broke in Benton's hand. He stared at it for a moment, then said, Look, I'll contact Captain Hines today. If he's just killed 2 women, he's not very likely to tell you the truth, is he? A pause. She looked at the computer screen again. Can you check his personnel record? Benton shook his head. That's confidential, and you know it. The desk thumped, shook. After an instant, Benton realized that this was because Joe had hit it. Hard. He looked up, amazed. What's happened to you, John? Benton wanted to say, I grew up, I got married, I have a wife and 3 kids and a job to hold down. But there were tears in Joe's eyes, and that stopped him from speaking. Listen, she said, those women could be dead. There's something going on out there. I need to find out what it is, and to do that I need you to make the arrangements. I know you can do it. The big, brown, caring eyes fixed on his. Please, John. Benton looked away, not sure whether he was amused, embarrassed, or just plain irritated. This was getting ridiculous. Joe had always been an impulsive person, but flying 4,000 miles on the strength of a phone call struck him as taking impulsiveness to new dimensions. It's not on, Joe, he said at last. If you're so sure there's something wrong, I'll contact Hines's CO in Nairobi, ask him to look into the situation. That's all I can do. Joe got up, swallowed, looked at the floor. The doctor asked me to help, she said suddenly. He wouldn't have done that without a reason. The doctor? It occurred to Benton that Joe might simply be lying in order to get what she wanted, but if not... Don't worry, I suppose I can pay my own airfare. Joe turned, started across the plush Whitehall carpet towards the heavy wooden door. Benton looked at his hands. If the doctor really was involved... All right, Joe, he said, you win. You'll have to get to Kenya on your own, but I'll lay on a chopper from Nairobi to Kilgai. You'll be a guest of the regiment, out there to do your scientific research. But just remember, if you get it wrong, if you put one foot out of place and start blabbing about aliens that aren't there, my career's on the line. Joe opened the door, then turned and said quietly, There's a lot more on the line than your career, John. I wouldn't be here otherwise. She went out and closed the door behind her. Benton stared at the cracked leather of his desk for a while, then picked up the phone.